Change is inevitable. In my Lore and Ludonarrative analysis of Siege and Vina Victoria, I talked about how a lot of our altars were created based on character developments over a long period of time, how they are a result of people growing and changing with their circumstances over a span of several years. But change is not limited to individuals, especially in a world like Arknights. Between catastrophic meteor showers spreading an infectious mineral, a disease that both grants power and devastates one's own life, war, racism, eldritch horrors, fear of the unknown, amongst others. Such things do not only change individuals, they can potentially change entire nations and cultures, change their priorities and ways of life. But of course, this does not come without backlash. Drastic changes like the entire culture of a nation does not happen overnight. There's a sort of stubbornness that we experience as individuals and even more so as a group. Our way of life worked. Why should we change? Surely if we've survived this long, we can make it out of this without needing to change anything, right? Perhaps, but not if you're fighting a hyper-adaptive species that is hell-bent on consuming everything you've built for centuries. In the face of such destruction, how long can your stubbornness hold? And in the collapse of everything you've ever known, how do you rise from the ashes? In the last video, we explored the history and the inception of the Abyssal Hunter faction, which included an overview of the history of Aegir and the Seaborn problem. In that video, we viewed the trials and tribulations of the Aegir from a very objective lens. It's very cause and effect, just to show how the rapid evolution of the Seaborn and the loss of so much life and infrastructure affected the actions of the Aegir. However, I didn't get to deep dive into how this affected the culture and the way of life of the Aegir and the lasting consequences of such events. Hello everyone! Rosabel's here, and in this video we're going to explore the history and evolution of Aegirian culture, its rise, fall, and change through the lens of one of our Abyssal Hunters, Laurentina. Welcome to the Lore and Ludonarrative analysis of Specter and her altar, Specter the Unchained. Usual heads up, spoiler warning for Undertide, Stultifera Navis, Path of Life, and IS-3, as well as some parts of the book Terra, A Journey, and operator records, files, and modules. I also highly recommend you watch part 1 of this series before jumping in here, since I will be mentioning a lot of stuff said there in passing.
Do you like to sing? What about dancing? Would you like to dance with me? It doesn't matter if you don't know the steps, I will teach you. Poetry, art, music, you must never forget these things. They are proof that all humans once lived beneath the starry night sky. Through these arts, and upheld by us, humans become eternal. Come, let's dance.
In the last video, I mentioned that Aegir is a confederate technocracy, where their council leaders are scientists and engineers who led Aegir to their technologically advanced society. It would be easy to assume then that everyone in Aegir would be scientists or engineers, but that would be false. The technocratic way of living extends beyond the technological development of Aegir and went into all aspects of life. Your profession is dictated by what you are most suited for. Like, oh, I'm really good at math and I'm very research-oriented, so I would become a scientist or an engineer. Or, oh, I'm very creative and have a knack of combining colors, so I would become a professional artist. It sounds almost utopian, doesn't it? But it was not always this way. Prior to the development of this government, Aegir was plagued with civil wars across their multiple cities. And because Aegir consisted of the vast ocean, there were a lot of cities vying for power to make decisions for the entire race. The turning point was when a sage appeared and stopped the civil wars, proposing a method of alliance for the city-states. And also, he laid the foundation of their technocratic way of life, using philosophy and knowledge as a tool for governance instead of just killing each other. This shift created the culture of Aegir that advanced so quickly that they were already planning to go to space while everyone else in Terra was still figuring out how to establish their first communities. This is not looking down on the rest of Terra though. We have to acknowledge that the Aegir also had so much advantage over the other nations of Terra. As we discussed in part 1, originium is not found in the oceans and so oripathy does not exist to them. At the same time, they had access to the lost technologies of the predecessors, the simultaneous advantage of 1. Not having a catastrophic, debilitating, and incurable illness, and 2. Getting a head start from an already technological civilization, led to their advanced perspective on society and progress versus the rest of Terra, or even modern-day sensibilities. I mentioned in passing in the last video that the Aegir had very humanistic values. But what does that mean? To illustrate this, let's bring up a little thing called Maslow's hierarchy of need. This is a very famous motivational theory in psychology, but I'll give you a brief breakdown of this. Basically, each level in the pyramid depicts a human need in order to survive and grow, with the bottom part being the most basic needs to survive and the top part being more advanced. It is depicted as a pyramid because you need to fulfill the bottommost needs first in order to get to the rest. Originally, this was a 5-level pyramid but has since been updated into 7 levels. We have from bottom to top, physiological needs, safety needs, social needs, self-esteem needs, cognitive needs, aesthetic needs, and self-actualization. Bringing this back, the Aegirian government covered the first 2, and so the Aegir people only had to work on their self-development and their community of belonging, which is a huge contrast to our reality. For example, let's say you're living from paycheck to paycheck. Most of your energy is dedicated into making sure you can buy groceries and pay your rent, which are physiological needs. So something like aesthetic needs, like collecting art to decorate your home for instance, would be the last thing on your mind. Imagine what your life would be like if you didn't have to worry about that. In Aegir, it's like saying, oh, we will automate all fast food production because nobody actually is meant for labor like that, and the only people who will work in the kitchen are people with a real passion for cooking food. Don't worry about making money to live. The government will provide all your basic needs like food and shelter. Go and create art without worrying about making money to live day by day. It's honestly such a fantastical idea. Like, can you imagine? Well, fantasy is fantasy for a reason. Anyway, all good things sadly come to an end. And the end of this amazing Aegirian society came with the release and the mutation of the Seaborn and their spread throughout Aegir. We talked about this all in part 1. But we have to understand, they did more than just become a massive headache for the Aegir, did more than destroy several Aegirian cities. The Seaborn destroyed Aegir's human-centric culture. Going back to the hierarchy of needs, with the Seaborn problem destroying city after city and mutating more and more, suddenly it cuts off all of Aegir's progress in their other needs because all focus goes back down to safety. How can they focus on their personal growth with extinction on the horizon? This is why I made my wording very clear in the last video when I talked about the suggestion of Oculatus to genetically modify the Aegir people. This was rejected because it went against the very humanistic value of the Aegir. A person is not just some robot you can switch the parts of as you please, but desperate times call for desperate measures, and when you are cornered by eldritch horrors beyond your imagination with the extinction of all life on the horizon, morality and principle goes out the door. You do anything to survive. And so, 200 years after it was first suggested, the bioengineering of Aegir was greenlit. From rejecting the idea of genetically modifying their people to green-lighting the Abyssal Hunter program, it did not just show their level of desperation, it signaled the end of Aegir's human-centric culture. But don't just take it from me. We can see the shift of Aegir culture by getting to know one of the people who underwent this change.
You want to know about my life in Aegir? After so much time, my childhood memories are a bit of a blur. Maybe I'll remember a thing or two by telling you about it. Originally, I was meant to be a sculptor.
Enter Laurentina, one of the many victims of the Seaborn. But before that, she was a girl who grew up surrounded by art. Her mother was an architect and her father was an engineer. And though not artists themselves, they did collect art. And she fell in love with art the first time she saw a sculpture. Like all other Aegirs, she already knew what she was meant to do and the direction of her life. In her own words, I still remember that snow-white sculpture. The moment I laid eyes on it, time seemed to stand still. The clock's hand refused to turn. I indulged in the eternal giant displayed before me, coming to realize what true art and beauty is. To this day, I do not understand the idea behind the creation sculptor, nor have I seen that statue again. However, all the emotional expressivity carried in that piece of stone have long found a home in my heart, and I hope that one day, I can be a sculptor acknowledged by the Aegir. One day I, Laurentina, will be able to create my own sculptures.
This was abruptly derailed when the Seaborn attacked her city and destroyed her home. As one of the few survivors, she was assessed and her physical condition was deemed good enough for her to join a program that had passed their clinical trials. A program that was greenlit out of desperation to find a solution to the Seaborn problem. And thus, Laurentina was made into an Abyssal Hunter. One would think she would be bitter about this shift in her life projection, but she had a very flippant attitude about becoming a soldier amongst the Abyssal Hunters, even though it involved her becoming genetically modified with Seaborn genes. In her own words, Aegir was so advanced that all basic needs are provided for them, and so, if the government tells them to be something, they obey. Thus, the woman born to be an artist became a soldier instead. She was assigned to the second company under the leadership and training of a console of technology turned Abyssal Hunter, Gladia. Like everyone else in the program, her appearance changed to have white hair and red eyes, and she developed high strength, speed, and endurance, and she became highly proficient with her hacksaw. Now, I said before that she had a flippant attitude about becoming an Abyssal Hunter, but she became more and more accustomed to her position as she was exposed to the Seaborn. To her, the Seaborn were an abomination to everything she had loved. The Seaborn are sometimes described as striking in their appearance and it leaves people awestruck. But all of this is not out of beauty. It is not out of aesthetic. It is because of pure evolutionary need. The most ingenious creations of Aegir were nothing more than useless artifacts unless they can contribute to the many's growth.
The second Abyssal Hunter team to which I belonged to was once responsible for clearing out a large Seaborn lair, an entire city that had fallen into the sea. Its various buildings turned into breeding nests. When I saw the colors bleeding from torn oil paintings and the desecrated stone statues covered with nests, I no longer had any reservations in my heart about slaying the Seaborn. Now that civilization has encountered vermin, I am more than happy to play the role of exterminator.
From flippant, Laurentina's attitude turned into pure hatred. In their final mission, the siege against the firstborn Isharmla, it was Laurentina and her team who created the opening for the third squad, which includes Skadi and Olpianas, to deliver the final blow to the firstborn. And, well, we talked about how that turned out. It wasn't enough. Her company was wiped out by the Seaborn, at least as far as she knew. An unconscious and wounded Laurentina washed up on shore when she was captured by the Church of the Deep. They experimented on her, injecting her spine with liquid originium. She contracted oropathy, and in her desperation, she fought to escape. She managed to make it to Rhodes Island, saying that she had a message, part of a dark conspiracy, and a nun's habit. She
Change is inevitable. In my Lore and Ludonarrative analysis of Siege and Vina Victoria, I talked about how a lot of our altars were created based on character developments over a long period of time, how they are a result of people growing and changing with their circumstances over a span of several years. However, there are some changes that happen due to circumstances forced upon our operators, and sometimes these changes happen outside of our periphery. And, as members of the pharmaceutical company Rhodes Island, how do we help someone recover when we don't know who they were? In this video, we're going to talk about an operator who had undergone some sort of mad transformation before she even met us, and talk about one of the violent effects of the very disease we are trying to treat. Hello everyone! Rosabel's here, and in this video we're going to talk about the lore and ludonarrative of one of our infected operators who has lost her original self due to oripathy, our local mad nun, Specter. Specter, real name unknown, arrived in Rhodes Island desperately asking for help before she descended into madness. It was a mishmash of memory loss, unstable emotions, and lack of self-awareness, with episodes of psychosis affecting her daily life, leading her to be a more isolated case in Rhodes Island. It didn't take long before this was associated with her oripathy. The medical team were surprised at the high percentage of infection at 14% assimilation, which puts her as one of the most infected operators we have in our roster. Oripathy has shown to affect our operators in different ways. We have operators who gain physical disabilities from nosebleeds to unusual traits, chronic pains, and blindness, as well as mental issues ranging from narcolepsy to schizophrenia to dissociative identity disorder. So, Specter getting amnesia and these psychotic episodes are not a stretch of the imagination. Perhaps it's just another symptom of oripathy that we had yet to encounter. The medical team also found out that her infection seems to have centralized in her nervous system, especially in her spinal cord, which is very unusual. But that's what tipped the medical staff off that her mental issues were related into her infection. In case you don't know, the spine contains the vertebral column, which is the actual bone that goes down our back, as well as the spinal cord, which is like a central hub for the nervous system directly linked to the brain. With her oripathy centralized there, it's no stretch of the imagination that it would affect her mental state. What was strange about Specter's condition, however, is that even with a high percentage of infection, she doesn't show the physical signs of infection. She doesn't have crystals all over her body, nor can she do originium arts. Huh. Did I mention that before? That was weird. Anyway, the case of her lack of originium arts is one of the symptoms that gave us a clue that there was more to her oripathy than what we thought we knew. In our assessment of her, Rhodes Island gave her a flawed score in her originium arts assimilation. Alongside the lack of originium arts, another strange thing about Specter is that her body seems to be self-sustaining. For her talent, she passively heals herself when she's on the battlefield, which implies that she's always regenerating herself one way or another. In the dorm, her self-morale increases as a passive effect when she's resting. This once again goes against our knowledge of oripathy, which systemically breaks down the functions of our operators as their sicknesses develop. So why is Specter's case so strange? It seems that there is something in Specter's body that seems to be fighting back the infection and suppressing it. That's the only way we can explain the lack of crystals, her flawed originium arts assimilation, and her self-sustenance. Is this a new stream of oripathy, or is there something in Specter's blood that somehow suppresses her infection? We can attribute this to her Seaborn blood because remember, the original intention for the creation of the Seaborn was to eat originium once the world had been consumed by it. This explains the lack of originium in the oceans and Specter's resistance to it. God, what is with today? That's so weird. Specter's oripathy is one of the oddest cases in Rhodes Island, but the team is at an impasse. They can't determine the root cause for this infection if they are unable to trace Specter's origins and the circumstances of her infection in the first place. But where do you start? How do you help someone when you don't even know who they were? The best we can do is piece together the things that we do know about her. She's a nun from a mysterious convent, one who worships something she affectionately calls the spirits. According to her, the spirits were the ones who gave her the name Specter.
I am Specter. That is what the spirits call me. That kind doctor informed me that I may receive further treatment by helping Rhodes Island. Yes, of course. My powers are yours to command.
We do not know anything about this convent or this religion of which she is a nun of, but her voice lines dictate that this is not just some normal religious convent.
That person's words are the complete and utter truth. Dissecting them, dismembering them, disemboweling them. It all grants them salvation.
This sounds more like a dangerous cult if you ask me. However, this was taken with a grain of salt, because Specter's mad personality might just be misrepresenting whatever church she came from. Which would be more convincing if it wasn't for the fact that she was a very strong fighter, to the point that her saying that she would dissect, dismember, and disembowel her enemies is not even a lie. First off, I need to say that our operators have observed that Specter is startlingly efficient in combat, like unnervingly so. While she acts mad on a day-to-day basis, when she's in the battlefield, she displays the calm and the reception to command as a seasoned warrior. She follows orders to a T with little to no regard of her own safety and destroys everything along her path, almost as if she was a trained soldier instead of a nun. What she lacks in Originium arts assimilation, she makes up for in spades with her strength, speed, and endurance. She seems more than accustomed to handling large groups of enemies on her own, which we can see with her class, a Centurion Guard. Her strength is showcased by her skills, especially her second skill, which makes her unkillable for a period of time and buffs her, like when she goes all out in an attack. The skill animation also gives her a black glowing effect, which is strange. I don't think Oripathy causes stuff like that. Looks kinda eldritch, to be honest. Well, speaking of insane combat capabilities, I suppose you can say that one person we can compare Specter to is Skadi, our resident walking catastrophe bounty hunter, who is the closest person we have to answer the questions about who Specter is, though she remains tight-lipped about their origins. I suspect that they must be siblings or at least close relatives. They share the same eye and hair color, and they also have similar species of animal that their character designs are based off of. Skadi is based off of an orca or a killer whale, while Specter seems to be inspired by two animals. Her weapon is based off of the teeth whorls of a helicoprion, while Specter herself is a bull shark, which kinda explains why Skadi affectionately calls Specter Shark of the Second, whatever that means. We met several other aquatic-themed operators, but none of them are even remotely close to the insane strength we see from Skadi or Specter. Not to mention, the two of them also share a faction, the Abyssal Hunters, which, I don't know, might be a bounty hunting thing? A family business? But the fact that she has a non-0% chance of somehow being related to Skadi gives us some insight, because Skadi is an interesting case as well. She's not infected, and she also has the record lowest blood originium crystal density of any operator. Perhaps there is something in the Abyssal Hunter blood that naturally resists Oripathy. Putting this together, we have a sort of disjointed view of who the person Specter was prior to becoming Specter in Rhodes Island. We don't really have the confidence to assert any of these assumptions, but it is the best we can glean until we find whatever the heck the church she says came from is, since that seems to be the bridge between whatever the Abyssal Hunters are to the mad nun Specter has become. Until then, Specter is a mystery, and the best we can do is monitor her and make sure her infection doesn't spread or worsen. But again, how do we help someone revert back to their original selves when we have no frame of reference on who that is? Who was the soldier that became a nun?
What did you do to me? Why was I made to drink that strange medicine? Who brought me to this place? Please answer me!
Quick disclaimer, I will go through the parts of the lore that are about Specter, but don't worry, we'll go through this in thorough detail when we discuss someone else. Who was the soldier that became a nun? Well, we were going to quickly run headfirst into our answers when one day, Specter was kidnapped by another Abyssal Hunter who we learned is named Gladia, someone thought to be dead by Skadi, something about how she was the second captain, which might be a title related to Specter's Shark of the Second. For most of the events of Undertides, it is in the perspective of Skadi while Specter was imprisoned, so I won't go into depth into the story in this video, but there were several things that were revealed along the way that relate to Specter. First, there's an underwater city called Aegir from which Skadi, Specter, and Gladia are native of but have been unable to return to. Next, there is a threat from the sea, eldritch horrors that seem to hypnotize, kill, and merge with the people of Salviento, a coastal city in Iberia. These monsters appear to be familiar prey to the Abyssal Hunters, called Seaborn.
Speaking of the Abyssal Hunters, it is then revealed that they are not necessarily related but are all genetically modified soldiers who are spliced with Seaborn genes in order to fight the Seaborn, Aegir Seaborn hybrids. And of course, we learn that the convent Specter was part of was indeed a cult known as the Church of the Deep, who captured her and experimented on her, hoping to unlock the secrets of how to create the Abyssal Hunters as well as how to deal with them. It was this church that injected liquid originium into Specter's spine, wanting to see how the Seaborn blood would react versus that which it was meant to consume, a sick experiment from twisted minds. However, proximity to the water in the Seaborn had a miraculous effect on Specter. As Gladia and Skadi confront Quintus, the Church of the Deep bishop who captured Specter, she regains consciousness as well as her memories and her sanity as she breaks out of her prison. Cornered by 3 Abyssal Hunters, Quintus gives in to his Seaborn blood and transforms into a giant eldritch flower-like creature, but he was no match as Gladia, Specter, and Skadi took him down. Specter remained lucid for some time, and in her operator record namely I, she attempts to tell everyone everything she could about what she experienced and what she knows. She also attempts to talk to various operators that she had encountered while mad. Sadly, the state was only temporary, as by the end of the record, the madness took over once more. Thankfully, she was able to sing again, an Aegirian skill that she had lost during her time without memory. After the events in Salviento, we go to Gran Faro, another coastal city in Iberia. Our 3 Abyssal Hunters were tasked with finding an old Iberian ship called the Stultifera Navis, a remnant of Iberian's golden age. I'm sorry, that song is just too good. Anyway, in order to do that, they first had to wipe out the Seaborn-infested lighthouse, one of the last standing eyes of Iberia which can connect to the ship itself. Once they locate the ship, the 3 Aegirians can use it in order to return back to Aegir, their home. A consequence of the conflict between Aegir and Iberian Inquisition, a theme that I will tackle if I end up talking about the islander Aegir and the systemic racism they experience after the Profound Silence. Upon finding the ship, they find it in pristine condition, albeit infested with Seaborn. The captain of the ship, Alfonso, had spent decades in the sea, sending out distress signals to the closed-off lighthouse ever since the Profound Silence, and somehow kept his sanity, though I use this term loosely, by eating the Seaborn that he kills while maintaining the ship with his first mate, Gracia. While clearing out the Seaborn, however, something about the ship being in the vast ocean, plus the sheer amount of Seaborn around them, something just... Wait. Specter... No. Laurentina?
I recognize you, and you recognize me. We don't need all those boring introductions. But you still don't know me, and I still don't know you. If I recall correctly, Drylanders use simple enough means to get to know each other. So let's get communicating.
Laurentina has returned as Specter the Unchained. Unlike the reclusive Skadi, the elusive Gladia, and the mysterious Ulpianus, Specter was pleasant to speak to, and she was very open to talk about whatever she could remember about her life in Aegir before and during the Seaborn crisis. In fact, most of the information that I used to describe the culture and life in Aegir in the first 2 chapters of this video came from Specter Alter's file. It is even prominent on how Specter the Unchained addresses the rest of Rhodes Island, where Ulpianus and Gladia call us land dwellers, which has derogatory undertones to it. Specter chooses the words dry landers, which has a more neutral tone and even implies a level of equality. We can even see this reflected in her dorm skill, where she trains operators regardless of their faction quickly. She treats everyone the same regardless whether or not there are other Abyssal Hunters, versus the skills of Gladia and Ulpianus. At first, our operators were very cautious when they tried to approach the new Specter. After all, the only impression they had was of the Mad Nun Specter. Thankfully, she took it all with a sense of humor, finding it a fascinating observation rather than an insult. Although she still remembers what happened during the time she had amnesia, she accepted it pretty quickly.
For someone like her, having another self simply provided another angle to view and understand the world. The medical department also observed that she tends to lose herself, going back into her mad state during fierce combat or during extreme emotional outbursts, though they weren't sure if she was truly reverting back to her mad nun persona or if she was just acting out of inspiration. Specter answers it for us in her operator record Selfhood. She describes it as having her other self, one who is affected by originium, but that self is suppressed when she's close to the sea, where her seaborn blood is more active. This explains so much because, as we talked about in part 1, her seaborn blood is what suppresses her oropathy, so while her seaborn blood is active, she becomes mentally stable. But when her seaborn blood is down by either her being too far from the sea for too long or from taking too much damage during battle, the madness driven by oropathy resurfaces. We can easily see proof of this in her gameplay by looking at her class and her first talent. Specter the Unchained is a doll keeper, meaning she does not retreat upon receiving lethal damage. Instead, she swaps into a substitute for 20 seconds before swapping back to her original state. This class does not retreat unless the substitute is defeated within those 20 seconds. Interpreting this in lore, her original state is our Laurentina, but when she is heavily damaged, her seaborn side goes down and she swaps with her infected self. If you think this is a stretch, we just have to look at the animation. Her substitute is wearing the nun's habit, reminiscent of the 5-star Specter. Her first talent, Embraced Self, describes what her substitute does. It creates an area of effect where an enemy movement speed is reduced and deals arts damage to them per second. This is the most telling aspect because the Abyssal Hunters, by nature, should not be doing originium arts. Their seaborn blood would suppress it. But this seems to be a form of originium arts, which would only make sense if we say the substitute is her oropathic self. These two selves of Specter make up the whole of Specter the Unchained, as we see in her E2 art. The main focus is Laurentina surrounded by water, which is her mentally stable self. But behind her, we see the nun Specter looming in the back. This is more prominent in her skin, where her two selves are depicted as yin and yang, implying that having both is what balances the current Laurentina, and in her tap animation, Laurentina goes away for a while, leaving the nun Specter to hold the fort until she returns. Another thing about her animation and her art is her gracefulness as opposed to her contemporary Skadi, who does stiffer, more power-focused movement. This showcases their difference in training. Skadi was trained by Ulpianus, whereas Specter was trained under Glaudia, a known dancer who uses dance to ensure that her people have not fallen as Seaborn, much like how Ulpianus uses song for his squad. Now, one more thing that is prominent in her file is that Specter gives us the impression that she does not see herself as the answer or a possible savior of the people from the Seaborn. She makes it very obvious that she sees herself as a stepping stone, as someone who paves the way rather than be the hero. Laurentina understands, perhaps more than she lets on, that it is not her destiny to end the Seaborn. We go back to the way of the Aegir culture back before the Seaborn problem, the human-centric culture which promoted self-growth and development in the areas that they are meant to be in. Laurentina was meant to be an artist. She had always known this. Circumstances forced her to change her path. The artist who became a soldier. Even if she claims that the way of life suits her, she understands that this is not her true calling. In fact, you can compare the way she talks about being an Abyssal Hunter versus the way she reacts to sculptures.
Doctor, don't blame me for having no interest in your grand endeavors. To be honest, the reason I became an Abyssal Hunter is hardly as lofty as you imagine. Abyssal Hunters bear a grave mission. But me? I just think the life suits me more, that's all.
Her attitude is flippant versus the way she reacts around statues and art. Whenever she sees one, she goes into complete silence and stares at it, and when she comes back to herself, she expresses her opinions on it with a profound level of depth and understanding. You can see several examples of how she talks about art in her operator record, Selfhood. All this to say, Laurentina was never meant to be a hero. She was assigned to be a soldier due to circumstance. And so perhaps there was an innate thought in her that her purpose is to just create an opening for those destined to be the heroes to defeat their enemy. Which brings us to her first two skills. Now I should start this by saying that there are clear distinctions between the first two skills for all Abyssal Hunters versus their third skill. As I mentioned in the Siege in Vina Victoria video, an operator's third skill is usually their best skill. This is because these skills are supposedly our operators unleashing their full potential, hence why they are only available after they are promoted to E2. For the Abyssal Hunters, this reflects in their use cases. We'll go deeper into this in their individual analysis, but a lot of the time, the first and the second skills of the Abyssal Hunters are the skills we use when we're using them outside of the Abyssal Hunter squad, while their third skills are more prominently used when the Abyssal Hunters are together. Specter Alter's first skill swaps her HP for an ally's HP and gives her an attack boost, and her second skill is an homage to her second skill as the Guard Specter, except instead of being stunned, she reverts to her substitute. Both skills show the mindset we talked about, that Specter Alter paves the way, protecting the others by taking out as many enemies as possible, taking as much damage as she could to give her allies an opening. Just like how she paved the way for Skadi's company to get to Ishar Mla, she now paves the way for our operators to hopefully work out a miracle to defeat the Seaborn, even if she has to sacrifice some of her health or temporarily incapacitate herself to do so. Now, the reason I say that these two skills are skills fitted for Specter when she's not with the other Abyssal Hunters is because these two skills encourage the release of her substitute form, the release of her oripathic self, which is the self of Specter that comes out more when she's on dry land. Indeed, even her module that improves this talent, her X module, Vinyl Record Box, matches this, where she plays an Iberian music record and contemplates on it. Although she can't help but look down on it compared to the music of Aegir, she acknowledges that she was becoming more and more accustomed to living on dry land and even talks about how she was slowly forgetting her home. In gameplay, this module increases the attack of her substitute and gives Specter the Unchained additional SP when she returns, which will encourage her to use her skills more often. Now, we compare this to her third skill, which makes her attack slower but gives her a giant attack boost. If her health is less than or equal to the enemies she's attacking, she deals extra attack. Otherwise, she loses a percent of HP over time. You can make the argument that this is a skill that can be used outside of the Abyssal Hunters. The second half follows the theme of Specter the Unchained sacrificing herself to deal more damage, aiming to probably end this skill by going into her substitute form. But the attack boost is too high to aim for that. She's more than likely to survive the skill duration rather than not. This is also one of the skills that benefits more from her staying on the field for longer. But this skill comes into play more when she's with the other Abyssal Hunters. Her massive initial attack boost alongside the already massive attack boost from the others makes it extremely powerful, and Gladia's passive heal for the Abyssal Hunters, especially with the boost from her module, completely cancels out the negative effect of having more health than her enemies. If an enemy is strong enough to bring down her health with all the Abyssal Hunter buffs, then she just becomes more aggressive. Not to mention, the third skill is unlocked alongside her second talent, Aegir's Depth, where she grants HP to her fellow Abyssal Hunters, increasing their survivability. This is also the talent that is improved by her Y module, the Beauty in the Incomplete. This gives a bigger HP boost to the Abyssal Hunters, but in addition, also gives all Abyssal Hunters additional SP production per second. In this module, it recalls an old conversation between Gladia and Ulpianus back when Laurentina first became an Abyssal Hunter, where they talk about how she was an artist and how the culture of Aegir lives with her. This implies that, aside from survivability, her second talent is a source of inspiration due to that connection, which helps her fellow Abyssal Hunters unleash their skills more by giving them additional SP per second. Again, paving the way for her fellow hunters to deal the decisive blow. And in a meta-narrative perspective, this concept of paving the way and not being the one to exterminate the Seaborn also reflects in our general gameplay.
More often than not, you would not use Specter the Unchained as your boss killer, nor Gladia, the two characters who were in the second company. You are more than likely to use either Skadi or Ulpianus as your boss killers, aka the Hunters in the third company. Overall, Specter the Unchained and her kit showcases someone complex but caring, someone who is a bit eccentric, a bit off, but knows her mission and knows her goals. She is a stark contrast compared to the mad Specter we first met. In fact, let's revisit that.
Hark to the boundless master of all creation, embraced by darkness, murmuring soliloquy. Let me take a stab, Doctor. Maybe you like the old me rather more than the present me. I'll be honest, I've got a soft spot for that me too. It's nice to be so pure, isn't it?
Now that we got to know Laurentina once more, it makes us look at her 5-star self with more scrutiny. The perspective when we talked about Specter before was in the lens of someone who had just made an account and took a look at her for the first time without knowing anything about her history. And the analysis we did is valid, albeit just rooted in mystery. But now we can have a different perspective when looking at the theme of Specter. Her talent gives her an HP boost, and she also heals a percentage of HP per second. Her second skill makes her immortal for some time, but then she is stunned for 10 seconds afterwards, which we can compare to her alter skill 2. However, unlike her alters, who becomes a form that slows and damages enemies, Specter's stun only leaves an opening for her enemies to get to her allies. In a way, compared to her alter, 5-star Specter looks selfish. Like I mentioned in part 1, her mental separation from the other hunters makes it so that she gains all the benefits for being an Abyssal Hunter, the faction buffs, but she doesn't contribute on her own. Even with her module, when she starts remembering who she was by a candlelight, she starts contributing an additional 5% damage when she's in the field, which, yes, more damage, but it's not super significant. You can do without it. Not to say that she's a completely selfish individual, we do see glimpses of that caring persona in her somewhat. In Specter's first operator record, Merry Christmas, Suzerain, our light woo, pulled Specter in the Rhodes Island gift exchange, and she had to go around to different operators to ask for help to get Specter's appearance so that Aosta could make a doll. Through this, we can see how wary everyone is of Specter, and even Meteorite was freaked out. In the end, Folinic and Warfarin help her create a sketch, and Warfarin passed the doll to Specter. A few days after Christmas, Suzerain wakes up to find the music box from quote-unquote the Abyssal Deep Sea. Still, it is a far cry from the mindset and attitude Laurentina has. She became an Abyssal Hunter because she was needed as one. She hunts the Seaborn ruthlessly because they destroy art and do not care about the preservation of the culture of Aegir. She charges the front lines to protect the ones behind her in hopes that they could deliver the killing blow should she fall. In her own way, she is a very caring person. In her operator record, there's even a sweet scene with Irene, where she reminds the Iberian that though their mission is important and full of war and death, she must always remember to see the beauty around her, pointing at the stars above Grand Faro after the events of Stultifera Navis. But all that complexity, kindness, and nuance was lost when she went from Laurentina to Specter. A kit that protects others so they can deal the killing blow versus a kit that is completely self-sustaining. Now doesn't that sound familiar?
Even if I've got a list of gripes about Rhodes Island, you people haven't abandoned the collection and preservation of art. I can retract all my criticisms just for that. Doctor, forget your job for a moment. This is a work you shouldn't miss. Not in a lifetime.
We started this video talking about the Aegir culture pre-Seaborn era, a human-centric society that prioritized the growth of each Aegir in the field that they are most suited for, a society that devolved from serving their citizens' growth into a society fighting for survival with the rise of the Seaborn. After the profound silence and the loss of the eyes of Iberia, they became isolated in the sea, completely disconnected from the rest of Terra, until Stultifera Navis, where one of the eyes finally relit and they managed to re-establish communication with Terra. We have to realize,
Specter's storyline is not just the story of an amnesiac who became mad from an experiment. Specter's story is the story of Aegir, Laurentina, the artist who knew what she was going to be in the future until she shifted from being an artist to a soldier following the attack of the Seaborn. After the failed siege against Isharmla and her capture by the Church of the Deep, she lost her memories and her connection to the other Abyssal Hunters until Stultifera Navis, where she regained her memories and finally met Rhodes Island as herself. But we have to wonder, have we really met Laurentina? Because we didn't know she was an artist, at least at first. It was only mentioned in her file when we got her altar. How are we so sure that the Specter we know now is the same as the Laurentina back then? Or is she a byproduct of the changes the Seaborn brought to Aegir? We can look at the names of her skills. The skill to survive, the thirst to survive, the pressure to survive. We can see it in her second talent and her Y module, which increases the HP of Abyssal Hunters and her own substitutes to increase their survivability. We can hear it in her voice lines.
For politeness' sake, I accept your commendation. But to us Abyssal Hunters, combat is the means we have to master to survive. We don't need applause or flowers for it. Doctor, you always worry so much. Do something for me. Tear this sheet up. Yes, just like that. Sometimes things aren't so complicated. Survival is splitting everything in your way in two. It's just that simple.
Survive, survive, survive. Safety needs. When we met Specter the Unchained, we didn't meet the original Laurentina. We met the Laurentina who had already been changed by the Abyssal Hunter program, the Laurentina that was a result of the Seaborn attacks and how it shifted the worldview of the Aegir, the Laurentina who had been captured by the Church of the Deep. Let's go back to Specter the Unchained's Y module to the conversation between Gladia and Opianus.
It is as if slaughtering those overgrown cuts of meat has become our unignorable, even our one and only calling.
It ought not to be.
Of course it ought not. When an Aegir wakes, the first thought that enters their mind should not be of what they've lost, never, nor of how to take back what they've lost. Oh, how many magnificent works we once made.
And now the battle to survive has become the only to-do list that this new generation knows.
Battle. A glorious word to be sure. And yet, our outstanding creativity and pursuit of beauty have been all but forgotten.
In the words of the Roman philosopher Marcus Cicero, the life of the dead is placed in the memory of the living. The true tragedy of Specter and of Aegir is that with the sudden shift and change, with the rise of the Seaborn and its effect on them both, we have lost the memory of who they once were. And without that memory, it is truly the death of Laurentina the artist, of Aegir the utopia. To illustrate this, let's take it a step back. When we first met Specter, without knowing who she was a nun who lost her memories. How did she end up in that convent? Why is she so proficient in fighting? How is she related to Skadi? What is an Abyssal Hunter? Who was the soldier before she became a nun? Let's take it a step further back. What did Laurentina look like before she became an Abyssal Hunter? What was her personality like? We knew she wanted to be a sculptor, but what was her relationship like with her parents? Did she have a lot of friends? Was she always a little bit eccentric? Who was the artist before she became a soldier? Let's take it a step further back. What was Aegir like at their peak? Was it truly the utopia that was fully at peace? Were there any remaining conflicts after the civil wars? Or did they really have everything figured out? What was Aegir before the Seaborn? We don't know. We will probably never know. Just as the Aegir of old has been lost to the Seaborn, we lost Laurentina the artist. All we have left are disjointed accounts that may or may not have been distorted by perception and time. The fantastical city that provided everything for their people might have just been a fantasy. The artist who loved sculptures more than anything could have just been a childish dream.
we go back to the animals that Laurentina represents. A helicoprion, which is an extinct species of shark whose only fossils we have left are their teeth whorls. And the bull shark, a shark that can adapt to both sea and fresh water but is hunted to near extinction. Laurentina is represented by something that has already gone extinct with only fossils of their teeth marks as remains, and a shark who is adaptive but is hunted to the point of becoming listed as vulnerable on the IUCN Red List. Hence why, unlike Siege, whose alter is her real name Vina Victoria, Specter kept her code name, Specter, a spirit, a ghost, the remnants of someone who had already died but continues to stay on Earth. The damage the Seaborn had done to Aegir cannot be erased, and they may have stubbornly held on to their ideas of isolationism and that they can solve all their problems by leaning into their advanced technology, but they do need help. Change is inevitable, and try as they might to stick to their ways, the culture would have to shift with the tides once more. And like how Laurentina believes that Drylanders can work up a miracle, perhaps Aegir can learn to believe in them as well. So what's next for Specter? Well, we still don't know what the long-term effects of her Oripathy versus her Seaborn blood will be. As I said in the last video, there's a chance we'll get a Specter alter with some lore about her Seaborn genes plus the Oripathy causing some weird mutation, mayhaps turning her into a super soldier. Maybe, with how her Seaborn blood suppresses Oripathy, there could be some connection between that and the cure for Oripathy, which can lead to another event where the Aegir come face to face with Originium and the Catastrophe since they are no longer isolating themselves from the rest of Terra. And who knows what we can learn from their advanced technology, especially since this technology came from the predecessors. But that is all speculation. As of now, we can see that the shift of Specter to her alter was not a simple matter of character development, like how Siege became Vina Victoria. Rather, Specter the Unchained is an expansion of the Specter we first met. It gives us insight to the complex person Laurentina is, rather than the mad nun with Oripathy we first saw her as, and how her change and shift in worldview reflects that of the culture of Aegir, and all this is reflected in her talents, skills, and modules. With this, I think Specter's inception and her evolution into Specter the Unchained was a Ludonarrative win. Thank you so much for listening to me ramble. Specter the Unchained was the first limited character I encountered when I started Arknights, and while I was still unaware of the Abyssal Hunter lore, I loved her design and the interplay between her mad personality and the gleam of wisdom underneath. Getting to know her and her connection to Aegir has been one of my favorite deep dives in Arknights. I may have gotten a bit off the rails into an analysis here, but that's what you're here for, right? I tried something new and different with this video, and I hope it added an interesting layer to all the nerdy stuff. In the next video, we're going to tiptoe the fine line the Abyssal Hunters face through the lens of our next operator, Skadi. Subscribe to me for more Lore and Ludonarrative videos or for news and gameplay on Arknights. Like the video if you enjoy it, and share the video to others who you might think enjoy it as well. Anyway, that's it for now. I'll see you guys next time. Bye!